Welcome to Tramlines, a podcast from Agrii. I'm your host, Tony Smith, putting your questions to the experts. Today we are joined by Agrii's David Leaper, Seed Technical Specialist, and Poppy Bunting, Seeds Manager based in North Anglia. In this episode, we're taking a technical dive into seed treatments, exploring traditional seed treatments and their viability alongside the new biological offerings, understanding soil-borne pathogens, seed-borne insects, diseases and pests, delving into exclusive seed treatments backed by Agrii's extensive R&D trials program, and discussing how we can grow healthy crops. This episode qualifies for BASIS and Naroso points. So, good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Morning, Tony.
And a very warm welcome back here on Tramlines. Now, the subject area of seed treatments is quite a big one, isn't it? But David, maybe you can help us by redefining, why do farmers spend that money on seed treatments? How does it help? Why is it important?
Well, we're treating seed really for three main reasons. We're looking to control pests and diseases, which are commonplace within our crops. We're looking at providing targeted nutrition to that emerging seedling. And then we're also using the technology to stimulate the growth, to get it up and away and ideally improve its yield. And we can do that through chemicals, and we can do that through some of the newer biosolutions. And that's what we're going to talk about.
And Poppy, what questions do you think we're going to be able to answer in this podcast that's going to be helpful to growers?
So I think to start with, many farmers will already be familiar with some of the seed treatments that they're using on farm, but perhaps from today they can just take away what should they be thinking about when they go to place their next seed order. And is there a new treatment they could try? Is there something novel coming along the pipeline that, even if they just try a little bit on one field, something like that, just to start to get used to some of these new products that could be coming through compared to what they've perhaps been using as a farm standard currently.
Yeah. So David, can you share a little bit of that history of seed treatments? Now, I don't remember these days, but I understand that, some of the first seed treatments were as basic as hot water. So can you share some of that history, just to remind us of some of those names and brands and how it's evolved?
Yeah, well, seed treatments have been used for hundreds, if not thousands of years. I mean, basically for seed, we're looking as almost to disinfect the seed. So, in the Egyptian times, they were using hot water, and even more recently than that, and things like urine, animal urine, to control these diseases on the seed. And then in more recent times, we've had products which we'd really startled at if it was used now, things like mercury, and they were being used up until the early 1990s. And all these things provide a sort of disinfectant of the seed, and they remove the spores. Then in the 1980s, with the sort of chemical revolution of the 70s and 80s, we saw the introduction of organic chemistry, and we had products that will be familiar to some of the older listeners, things like Milstem, Ferax and Baytan. And these were really game changers because they allowed for the first time not just to control those diseases on the seed, but they could actually control things like mildew and yellow rust and actually suppress diseases in the growing crop as they moved into the plant. And then we saw the mercury ban for obvious reasons, and we started controlling diseases with likes of Ferax and Baytan, but things like carboxin and better chemicals, much more benign and much safer to the operators. And these were targeted at the main diseases. So for wheat, that's bunt and seedling blights, the emerging diseases, and in barley, things like loose smut and leaf stripe, and in things like oilseed rape, the pythium and damping off diseases. And these are all endemic in our crops.
And David, you mentioned some of these modern seed treatments being very effective. How effective are they?
Well, the level of control we can achieve from a modern seed treatment is tremendous. We're getting upwards of 97% control to get a label claim. So these are really highly effective products. They are applied at very low doses and are highly targeted. And 20 years ago, they were seen as the great future for targeting technology.
Thanks, David. It's an amazing story, isn't it? That development of seed treatment technology through the ages. Poppy, can I ask you, well, what is the level of seed health in the UK?
Yeah, so I think, well, firstly, it's important to remember that any seed purchased or sold onto farm in the UK must be certified. Growers are obviously also able to farm save their own seed, and a lot of growers throughout the country take a lot of pride in growing their own seed for their following crops. So the seed certification system helps to maintain seed health, to make sure everyone's growing seed at that high level, and ultimately that helps to protect the grower by making sure that the seed meets high standard, whether that's for germination, seed purity, and to ultimately help to make sure there's no contamination in that seed either. So one of the benefits of the seed certification system is actually that there's checks within place throughout that. So whether that's initially in the field, so all seed crops will be inspected by a crop inspector. That helps us to first of all get a look at that crop earlier on, and to make sure we check for any disease or contamination before harvest. We can also then bring samples into the lab after harvest, and that helps us we can then check for germination and seed viability, and that might help us to pick up, for example, in a high disease year, any seedling blight that may be within the seed crop. So that just helps us to pick up on disease from an early stage before the growers buying that seed onto farm. So seed is routinely checked for disease in the labs, and farmers can opt to buy reclaimed seed, but I would say generally this is still less than the 1% of our seed sales, and where farmers are requesting untreated seed, we would always supply that, but with the caveat that they need to be testing their seed and soil really to make sure there isn't a presence of disease. They're making sure that they get that crop off to the best start possible, and seed is the first place to start with that.
And David, if I was an agronomist or farmer listening today, the question I might ask is, well, what seed-borne diseases are a current threat? What should I be really mindful of at this time in terms of protecting my crops in order to produce a healthy crop?
Well, I think you have to think that seed-borne diseases are generally maintained at a low level. So those are things like loose smut, bunts, leaf stripe, very low levels, but they have the potential to massively explode. The thing that does vary year on year are the seedling blights. These are the fusarium species, the microdochium nivale, and they will be governed pretty much on the amount of rainfall we have at flowering. So we have periods where we have low levels of disease some year and very high levels of disease in other years. So the watch out for farmers is don't assume that seed-borne diseases are always at a low level. And it is testament to the combination of the certified seed system and the routine use of chemical seed treatment that we are in such a strong position in the UK with really good, robust seed health.
And so I guess, David, that's a good news story, isn't it? Poppy, you mentioned certified seed earlier on, and what we've seen over the last year or so is a resurgence, perhaps you could say, of farm-safe seed. What are your thoughts?
So yes, absolutely. That can be for various reasons. So obviously the seed availability plays a factor in that, seed quality year on year. As I said before, a lot of farmers take a lot of pride in growing their own seed crops. But I think it's important to remember that, whilst farm safe seed is there as a really useful tool, we still need to make sure we're germ testing that seed and treating that seed as well, for whether that be for pest and disease, whether that's from a nutritional point of view. So again, make sure that is the first input, and it's getting the farmer off to the absolute best start, because we can still have an incredibly high quality product even with farm safe seed.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start looking at some of the developments that perhaps are in the pipeline. So, David, tell us a bit about some of those developments when it comes to new seed treatments.
So there's a lot of interest in developing seed treatments, and the way forward because of the pressures on regulation is the increasing adoption of biosolutions. So these are biological systems and moving away from chemicals. Um, and within this area, there are sort of two main things. There are products that provide control of diseases and pests, and we term these as biocontrol agents. And these are actually quite hard to find because you're looking for biological activity. Then there's a second area of products which are biostimulants, and this is an area where there's a lot of research, particularly with interest in the regenerative farming systems adopted by many farmers. And these we would term biostimulants, and there are two different groups. At the moment, for biocontrol, there are relatively few products coming through, and that's largely because of the high barrier to entry with the regulatory costs associated with those. So there's quite a lot of work on bioproducts, but it tends to be in the area of biostimulation. And I'm, happy to talk about both.
Yeah, well, let's delve in then and start to look at the biocontrol agents, and we'll come to Poppy for that. But just before we do, if I was a farmer, it's much easier, isn't it? Or is it? To think about, well, it's traditional chemistry. I can see what it does. It's in your R&D trials. It gives me a result. That's really easy to get my head around. Is there a challenge here in us all understanding these biocontrol agents and stimulants? Is that a challenge for our industry as we go forward? David, what do you think?
I wouldn't say it's a challenge per se. I think the use of biology to harness biology is a challenge because in many instances for the plant, for example, to increase its own defense mechanisms against a disease relies on that crop growing well and having good conditions to trigger those natural defenses. But of course, our crops are going into quite hostile circumstances, particularly in the autumn where soil conditions are cold, the temperatures are declining, and the crops are not at their best. So we are having to probably rethink our approach to pest and disease control, particularly when it comes to biocontrol agents, because we don't have the benefit of a chemical which just works generally independent of those environmental conditions. So what we're going to find is the challenges associated with biocontrol and biostimulation are much more complex.
Very interesting, David. I love the way you describe that as being much more complex. So to help us through some of that complexity, Poppy, here's a challenge for you. Could you explain to us a little bit about biocontrol agents? What are they? What do they do?
One example of biological control agents is actually within the organic sector. So organic farmers have been using these products for several years now, and one in particular is based on the Bacillus thuringiensis bacteria, which is sometimes more commonly referred to as BT. In cereal and oilseed rape crops, we do have some other examples. So in oilseed rape, we have a product called Integral Pro, and this is where the product contains bacteria which actually colonizes the plant roots, and from this substances are produced that can reduce spore germination, and the bacteria acts as a barrier really around the root. It creates what's called a biofilm around the plant roots. These products can help to improve overall plant establishment. As David touched on, often the plants aren't growing in the most favourable conditions depending on autumn conditions. Products like Integral Pro have also been found to help reduce the impact of cabbage stem flea beetle. It helps to help with that autumn vigour, as I said before, and to help to get the plants off to the absolute best start, so that if there is the likely imminent attack of cabbage stem flea beetle, it helps the plants to have the best chance to withstand that attack.
So, Poppy, that's cabbage stem flea beetle. What other benefits have you noticed, observed in work and in field scale use?
Yeah, so Integral Pro has also actually been seen to help with some of the key diseases of oilseed rape, so like leaf foamer, for example. And we found that there's been some benefit in control, perhaps over some of the previous Thiram-based products that came beforehand. And now Integral Pro has absolutely become the main seed treatment for oilseed rape. And I would say probably most of the oilseed rape that is supplied probably comes with Integral Pro as a seed treatment. And that's a really good, I suppose, case study where we've seen a newer and more innovative type of product actually become the norm now for many farmers, as they've seen the benefits on their farm, and they can see the benefits for themselves.
Can I just add something on Integral Pro?
Yes, of course. What would you like to add?
I mean, Integral Pro was introduced at the same time that Thiram was banned, and we were really dependent on hypoduet and Thiram to control these diseases in oilseed rape, and that overnight it was banned. And it just so happened Integral Pro came to the market, and we couldn't believe it because the level of control from this biological product was at least as good, if not better, than the chemical products it was replacing. And I think some of that is due to the fact that oilseed rape is drilled in warmer conditions, usually in the middle or historically towards the end of August, ideal conditions for these bacteria to activate and do their job. When we've tried similar products in winter wheat, once we start getting into the colder conditions in October and November, we see less activity. And that's probably the reason why we've seen fewer biocontrol agents in the UK market.
Why not download the Agrii Spring Crops National Yearbook 2025, now available at https://yearbook.agrii.co.uk. David, could you tell us a little bit about biostimulants? You mentioned those a bit earlier on.
Well, we've had access to biostimulants for a number of years, and with these we're looking to improve the plant's growth, and that can come through improved nutrition, improved tolerance to abiotic stresses, and improve the availability of the nutrients in and around the growing seed. And we've looked at many products over the last 20 years. We've had a full R&D program for many years, and most, to be honest, fall by the wayside. And I think manufacturers make a lot of claims. A lot of claims are made in the glass house, and when we actually take them into the field, we then tend not to see the same level of effect. So we've been quite choosy, and I think as a result, we have seen some biostimulants, and we are seeing coming through. But you've really got to make sure you've tested them in the field, and rather than go on some of the effects that you might expect from the greenhouse. And within these, we've got two groups. We've got the non-microbial products going forward, if we're looking at non-chemical products, and we've got live microbial products, and we can talk a little bit about those.
Sounds a good idea, David. So, Poppy, can you start us off by taking us through some of those product areas?
Yeah, absolutely. So an example of a non-microbial biostimulant is actually with seaweed. So historically, seaweeds were used as soil conditioners, but later it then became clear that these products actually have a positive effect on crop growth. Now that's due to, these seaweeds contain both macro and micronutrients, as well as hormones such as auxins, and ultimately acids as well. And all of these are found to have a positive effect on plant growth, and mostly because they actually stimulate a plant defense response within that plant to help them respond to pest and disease, and to ultimately then help them to become a stronger, healthier plant, which can then have a following effect on nutrient uptake and makes them more able to tolerate stress as well. So biostimulants are widely used on farm currently within foliar programs. For example, you've got products such as Human Extra. And this is where we're using humic acids, for example, along with nutrients such as manganese, all again just help to stimulate crop growth, which then makes these plants more able to tolerate any stress or disease or pest attack that may come along within the growing season. Other products would include amino acids and peptides. And again, these are found to trigger a plant hypersensitive response. Now, I think this was first found to be the case in the early 1990s. But the more we use these types of products, the more we're learning about them all the time. So again, when applied to plants, These products actually stimulate the plant's own natural defense response. And peptides specifically are actually designed to mimic the damaged cell wall of a plant. So if there's been an attack from disease or pest, it's ultimately helping the plant to then target that area. So an example of a peptide-based seed treatment is a product called Newton. It's said to promote rapid germination and improve early growth and development. It's been tested in our own trials, but actually the results have been found so far to be inconclusive. So a little bit more work is needed just to help us specifically target where's best to use these products and to help us understand them better.
David, are there any other areas that we still need to consider in terms of options?
In terms of non-microbial products, I think it's fair to say that we got the heads up of some of the active components because seaweed is so good in nourishing a crop. And when we delved in, the industry delved in to find out what these were, these organic acids seem to be very active in terms of providing a stimulus to growth. And we've been putting these into our foliar programs, and increasingly we're using them as the basis for our seed treatment programs as well. And this active component is often co-formulated with nutrients as well to give an extra bang for the buck.
Mm. And what about live microbial products? I know that this has been quite an area of interest, particularly from some of the regenerative farming interest groups.
Yeah, indeed. So I've talked a little bit about Integral Pro as a bacteria and the effects that it has. The endophytes are very interesting, and there's a lot of research being done across the world looking at endophytes, because these are either fungi or bacteria that live within the cell of the plant or between the cell walls, and they actually grow and develop within the crop. And so they build, so the benefits build as you grow through the season. And some of them can be used to provide enhanced nutrition. And we've seen some where there's a degree of nitrogen fixation, which is really exciting. The ability to cope with stress, particularly things like drought and heat tolerance. And, these things are increasingly important because of things like global climate change and the ability of the crop to withstand that, and actually enhancing the biology within the plant.
Yeah, very, very much. It sounds it. And then taking that a step further, there's bacteria and mycorrhiza fungi in terms of, using what's naturally occurring in the soil. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, there's a lot of interest for obvious reasons, particularly coming from the regenerative community, because we want to look after our soils, and soils are a mix of good and bad fungi and bacteria, and they make the balance. And what we want is a soil that has favourable mix of mycorrhiza, fungi and bacteria. There's a huge amount of work being done to enhance these organisms, but we don't see products within our own programs. I mean, this is something which is probably a little bit more holistic. The one thing we have to ensure is that we don't have products that are an antagonistic for those non-target organisms within our soil. So a lot of work we do is to make sure that whether it's a chemical seed treatment or indeed one of these new biosolutions, that they are not damaging the soil and increasing the mycorrhizal balance of our soils.
From your own R&D trials at Agrii, have you looked into and evaluated any of these new biological seed treatments?
So we've tested a lot within our foliar programs, in our R&D programs, and indeed seed treatments. And we have seen over the last 3 years the introduction of a seed treatment, ULO-IN, which is proving very popular with farmers. It is still subject to the crop growing well, and we have to understand these need to be positioned. And I think Syngenta would say themselves that these are probably best suited for later drilling or in situations where the crop is likely to encounter stress in the spring, so on lighter land. Not necessarily for use everywhere, but they can be used as a way of adding in extra nitrogen or being used to sustain nitrogen where you're forced to reduce applied nitrogen inputs. So really interesting.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, isn't it, Poppy? I mean, making sure we get that balance right.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Tony. I think it's like David said, it's probably about understanding where it's best to use these products. I think there's so many different options out there, and there's a lot more work to be done in future trials as well, as new products will ultimately come through the system, and that's where we can help with looking at those trials to identify what products might work in what situations, at what time, in what crops. There's so many questions to be answered, but it's also a real opportunity to try new and novel things on farm.
Yeah, and as you say there, Poppy, there are so many questions to be answered. If I'm a grower, an agronomist listening to this podcast, how do I know what is being done to demonstrate the efficacy of these new materials? David, what are Agrii doing?
Well, I think the industry as a whole is really keen to demonstrate, and of course, under their regulatory framework that we've had over the last 40 years, are very keen to demonstrate the lack of harmful effects on non-target organisms. And the seed treatment suppliers, the likes of Syngenta and Bayer, have always done a huge amount of work to look at the biological compatibility of seed treatments in our soils. And you can look at and this information is in the public domain, to look at the effects on the wider soil microflora. So it's important, and particularly within biological systems, that we are getting the best out of our products and we're not causing any antagonism. So, this work will ongoing. It's complicated, it's expensive, but it has to be done.
And Poppy, how would you summarise, how would you bring together all that we've discussed today that's really relevant to farmers and agronomists out there on farm?
Yep, so absolutely. I think it's essential that we understand how to use these products and where to use these products. And the best place to begin to understand that is within a trial system. We can start to look at farm systems, but before we actually put these products onto farm, we already then have that initial understanding of where they can be used best, where the grower can get the best investment, and where they may fit best in the rotation.
Thank you, Poppy. And for you, David, the final question for this episode is, where do I start in terms of making the best decisions with regards to seed treatments in order to grow healthy crops?
It's a very good point. I would start with rotation. I would say, are you growing second wheats? We know that second wheats are vulnerable to take-all. So is latitude an appropriate treatment? And that will depend on land type, amongst other things. When are you drilling? Are you drilling early, in which case the pressure on disease is generally lower? Are you drilling late? If you're drilling late, you've got more hostile soil conditions, and these damaging seedling blight diseases are more important. Are you growing in a blackgrass situation? Because if you are, improved establishment, improved biostimulation that we've seen from products like Vibrance Duo will help mitigate against the effects of blackgrass. Are you saving your own seed? It might be worth checking to see if that seed is diseased. If it's not, maybe rather than applying a chemical seed treatment, you apply a nutritional product instead, because you'll get a better return from that, from controlling diseases that are maybe not there. Are you on a land type which is prone to drought? If we are using something that will stimulate the plant's growth early, producing more roots, producing more root biomass, and indeed more above ground biomass, those crops with an enhanced root system are better able to withstand spring and summer droughts. So there's a whole number of things that you might be taking into account when looking at seed treatments, whether it's disease control, whether it's targeted nutrition, or indeed biostimulation.
Thank you, David and Poppy, for such a comprehensive insight into seed treatments. Next time, we will be hearing all about the Tusmore Blackgrass demo at Brackley. And if blackgrass is a problem on your farm, this episode is really worth a listen. If you have any questions for our experts that you'd like answered, email info@agrii.co.uk. That's it for this podcast, but do tune in again as we meet the experts throughout the season, exploring the many immediate and longer term questions for growers and farmers in the UK. See you next time.